Welcome to today's 5-minute Bible study in the book of Joshua. We're in Joshua chapter 21. Today we're looking at the final paragraph of this chapter. That's found in verses 43 through 45. Now this concluding paragraph of chapter 21 is sort of a summary statement, a concise description of the conquest of the Promised Land. Chapters 1 through 21 dealt with that conquest. It's told us in some detail the outline of how Israel took possession of the Promised Land. For instance, the first few chapters, chapters 1 through 5, talk about how they prepared to cross the Jordan River, how they got themselves ready, how they crossed the river, and then reestablished the covenant as God's people, and then began the conquest. Now, the first several chapters, about 6 through 9, describe what we call the central campaign, where they took the central part of the Promised Land. Jericho was the first objective, but others followed. And then after they took the center of the land, they turned their attention to the south, which is found in chapters 10 or so. They conquered the Amorite coalition in the south, led by Jerusalem. And then after they conquered the southern portion of the land, they turned their attention in chapter 11 to the northern part of the campaign, the area that would later be known as Galilee. And so we have these descriptions of their conquest of the entire land, beginning with the center, then the south, and then the north. And then chapter 12 gave us a list of all the kings that conquered over that period of time. And then a long section of Joshua talks about the division of the land. After they've taken the land, they have to divide it up among the tribes. So chapters 13 through 21 deal with that division. And then when we get to the end of chapter 21, we read this summary statement of what God had done for the people in giving to them the Promised Land. So, Joshua chapter 21, verses 43 through 45. So the Lord gave Israel all the land he had sworn to give their ancestors. They took possession of it, and they settled there. The Lord gave them rest on every side, just as he had sworn to their ancestors. Not one of their enemies could withstand them. The Lord gave all their enemies into their hands. Not one of all the Lord's good promises to Israel had failed. Every one was fulfilled. So this paragraph assures us that God had fulfilled his promises. He had first made that promise to Abraham so many years before, that your descendants will be in possession of this land. The promise had been spoken, and now it was completely fulfilled. God's promises always are. God's word is utterly reliable. And the word of promise he had made to the children of Israel, that they would come into possession of the promised land, has now been fulfilled. Notice it says, not one of his promises had failed. They were all fulfilled. None of their enemies could stand against them, because the Lord was with them. Israel is in possession of the promised land. Now, I think I've told you in a previous session that this conquest took probably about 7 years. So these 21 chapters we've been looking at, from chapter 1 through chapter 21, through the conquest, it took around 7 years period of time. This was not an easy thing. It was a difficult journey, but God was with them every step of the way. And now the land of promise originally made to Abraham, is utterly and completely fulfilled. They have the land. They're in control of it. It's been divided among the tribes, and they're beginning to settle the land, to settle down and make this truly, truly their home. Now, the book of Joshua is not quite over. There's still 3 more chapters to go. Chapter 22 is going to tell us the story of a near division among the people. They almost came to a civil war. And we're going to see that in chapter 22. And then in chapters 23 and 24, which will conclude the book, we see Joshua's final farewell to the people as his life draws to a close. And he knows that he has one more act of powerful leadership, a farewell speech and an injunction to give them to prepare for their future. So the next few days, we're going to look at chapter 22, the near civil war. It was averted, but it was close. And then Joshua's final leadership act for his people in chapters 23 and 24. So we'll start looking at those tomorrow. So join us next time for our 5-minute Bible study in the book of Joshua.